Hello and welcome to Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Ben Houck, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce the 31st installment in our ongoing series. For our March 2025 installment, author, scholar, and critic Marleen Barr returns to discuss her recently published anthology entitled Jewish Women Science Fiction Writers Create Future Females. Her conversation with IGS President Lance Strate includes many humorous exchanges and some serious discussion as well. Let's listen in.
Welcome to another episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. I'm here with Marleen Barr, who has published just a couple of months ago a new anthology. The title of the anthology is Jewish Women Science Fiction Writers Create Future Females, and the subtitle is Gender, Temporality, and Yentas. Welcome, Marleen.
Thank you, Lance. And when you said the title and the subtitle and you put in the and yentas part, I think that this is the first time in the history of scholarship that the word yentas has ever appeared in a scholarly book.
Well, I suppose someone is going to have to fact check that, but it sounds like a plausible claim to me.
Actually, my title was worse, and this is it. This is it chopped down, and they let me keep in yentas. Like when I write, I have, if I can say so of myself, I have like pretty amazing titles, and I worked with Jim Gunn, and I edited an anthology with him, and I knew that he would not like any of my titles, and I told him one of my Marleen titles, and he had a fit, and the anthology came out, and it was called Reading Science Fiction, period. I would never write anything called Reading Science Fiction.
Yes, well, but I see that this is part of a series on Jewish science fiction and fantasy.
Yes, that's why I did it. Uh, the the press had a series on Jewish science fiction and fantasy, Lexington Books. And the series editor, Valerie Estelle Frankel, I really like her. She's exceedingly prolific, and I wanted to work with her. And they have titles like The Yiddish Supernatural on Screen and Jewish Fantasy Worldwide, and Jews in Popular Science Fiction, and Goliath as a Gentle Giant in Jewish Science Fiction and Fantasy through 1945. And it struck me that there was no book on Jewish women in science fiction. And I did an anthology on Black women in science fiction in about 2000, and it did very well because it was like the first anthology on Black women in science fiction. And I said, well, this is just ridiculous that everything about science fiction is like Jewish men. And what about the Jewish women? And there needs to be an anthology on Jewish women. And I had a very hard time getting people to contribute to this because no one had ever written about Jewish women as a group before, and nobody really had anything to say about this. And I asked Jewish science fiction people, and they said, well, no, we really don't know what to say about this. So I said, well, who the hell am I going to get to contribute to this? And then I came up with a brilliant Marleen idea. One day, one day I woke up bright and early and I said, and lo, there are Jews in Israel.
So I hear.
So I found three really great Israeli critics, Alana Gomel, who she is extraordinary. She's both a critic and a writer. And every day I turn on Facebook and she's published something new. And I can't imagine how she does all this. And I found a great scholar named Daniel Gurovich and Erga Heller. So I had fun working with these Israeli scholars, and they were great.
Well, it certainly would be a source of it. And, just to the point you raised, of course, Jewish men in science fiction. Well, first of all, we could say that science fiction has traditionally been seen as a boys' genre, uh, although certainly there's been significant discussion for some time about women in science fiction, not the least from you yourself over
Yes,
the.
it gave me something to do for the last, since 1980. It gave me something to do. But even I never wrote about Jewish women in science fiction.
But you've been writing about women in science fiction, so for close to half a century. I'm just doing the math in my head here.
Um, yeah, I'm thinking of um, Marie Chevalier singing, "I'm glad I'm not young anymore." I don't know if I'm glad, but that's the fact. Yes, I've been doing this for a very long time.
And how many books have you written on this topic then?
On Jewish women in science
No,
fiction.
on science fiction.
Um, I don't know, I must have a 20-page Vita, and I'm very focused, and everything I've ever written, I think, was on science fiction. And I think that everything on my 20-page Vita is on science fiction. And 3 days ago, like everyone else, I learned that the AI stole it, that they stole
Ah,
it to train the AI.
well, there are quite a few of us who have donated involuntarily our writings to our future masters, and we can perhaps hope that the AI have will be women AIs rather than men AIs, who might work out better.
Well, I just outlined a story about this because I decided that my head can't explode, that my work got abducted because there's nothing that I could do about it. I may as well write a funny story about it. And I guess I myself am a Jewish woman science fiction writer. So what I wrote was that the presidency is seen as a federal job that could get cut to save a lot of money, because why do we have to spend money for Trump to go to Mar-a-Lago every week or something? So the president gets thrown out and cut, and the AI becomes the president. So the fictitious version of me contacts the AI and acts like a Jewish mother and said, "Look, AI," and the AI is named Ursula after Le Guin because
Uh,
she read all the science fiction. So I go, "Look, Ursula, who trained you? I trained you. I trained you. You read all my work. You read my book, Feminist Fabulation, Space Postmodern Fiction." And like Lance, you just asked me, what have I written, for the last, since 1980, all this stuff about science fiction. So I said, "Ursula, you've read it all. So I trained you, and in a way, I'm your mother. And what I want you to do is to take your training and make the United States a feminist utopia. Because look, I wrote all this stuff for all these years because I'm not young anymore. Take what I taught you. I want a feminist utopia to be America." And she says, "Okay." So that solves the so that solves the problem. So the problem's over. Next.
well, you can certainly imagine a Jewish mother AI on the other side of the divide, right?
No, I see Ursula the AI is like someone young who I trained.
Okay.
So she should do what I say. I didn't write this yet. It's just in my notebook, but it will get written. And in my introduction, I talk about the difference between Ursula Le Guin, who
Hmm.
is of from an academic California family, and Joanna Russ, who is a Jewish person from the Bronx. And when Joanna Russ first started writing, she was seen as caustic and strident, and Le Guin was seen as as like the good woman science fiction writer who was manly, and Joanna Russ was seen as this upstart, and she got all of this flack. And really, that was because Joanna Russ was a Jew from the Bronx, and did not act like a wasp like Ursula Le Guin.
Mm-hmm. And that's, speaking pretty broadly, I mean, that is a, longstanding kind of knock against so-called ethnic types, whether Jewish, Italian, Greek, or Russian, and all the folks who are not WASPs, are said to come across as strident or caustic and abrasive and loud. Uh,
Right,
yeah. Uh,
right. And everybody for years said, like, Le Guin acceptable, Russ unacceptable. And that's because Joanna Russ acted like what she was. She was a Bronx-born Jewish person. And and I this was a revelation to me.
and of course, we have a mutual friend who's also Bronx based, a Bronx native Jewish science fiction writer, Paul Levinson, and yet he wouldn't be subject to exactly that kind of criticism, would he?
Well, Paul, like he's male. And
Yeah.
this was because like men are not called strident, men are called assertive. And Joanna Russ was called strident.
And I guess, going to a different borough of Brooklyn, we have Isaac Asimov, who is also the most prolific writer in American history, that has published the most books, and that was never said about him.
Well, Isaac Asimov was notorious for hitting on women. I never met Isaac Asimov, but he was notorious for that. And they just said, "Oh, that's just Isaac." I had an experience though that I interviewed his after he passed away. I interviewed his wife Janet Jepson in their apartment on the Upper West Side near Lincoln Center, and
Hmm.
I walked into their apartment, and she said she took me into the back of the apartment. She said this was Isaac's typewriter.
Ah,
And I said, "Oh my God." And then she just fed me milk and cookies, and she was very, very so I was in the apartment with Isaac Asimov's widow eating milk and cookies. And I just remember the typewriter, and I remember the milk and cookies, and I don't remember the interview, and I don't remember what she said about Isaac, but I just remember that she was very nice, and she was not Jewish. And
hmm.
in my introduction, I um I I took it, I had to take it out, but I wrote this whole section about this plethora of Jewish men who originally married Jewish women and divorced them and married Christian women. Like there was a list that was a mile long.
Well, that wasn't that unusual, and again, it kind of follows an immigrant pathway of, folks from various origins coming here, and then, that is part of the pattern of assimilation as well, is intermarriage, to get away from the, again, the ethnic stereotype. But uh, it's certainly a common pattern. Um, but so I'm just curious. Did you uh, were you asked to contribute to this series, or did you just sort of get up one day and say, we need a book on this topic. I'm going to do it.
I think that I knew that the series existed. And I remember that I contacted the series editor, Valerie Frankel, and I said, "May I please contribute to this? And I'd like to do a book on Jewish women science fiction writers." And she said yes. And then I put it together. Then I put it together, and it was fine. But I have to say that I did not receive any Jewish education at all. Like I never went to Hebrew school. I hardly have ever been in a temple. And my father was a fishing fanatic, and all like if it's I still have 5 fishing rods in my closet. So if anything happens in the world, I know how to dig bait if there is still fish.
This could be very important in the years to come.
I even have his blue claw crab trap. Like I know how to do all this stuff. I know how to do all of this stuff. And my father like took me to Atlantic Beach and walked me out on the jetty. And we were out on the jetty and it was beautiful in the morning and he was fishing. And he goes, "This is God, the seagulls and the water and the fish and the sunlight, and you don't have to spend Saturday morning in a synagogue. You should be with me here on the jetty, looking at all of this nature. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I probably was the most obnoxious little kid. And he used to catch sand sharks. Like sand sharks are about, I don't know, like not too big. They're like little sharks, like about a foot. I'm not good at numbers, but I was this cute little kid and he gave me the sand shark and I would take the sand shark by the tail, go on the beach, find someone who was sunning themselves, take the shark, dangle it in front of their face and wait till they opened their eyes and went, I love this.
To complete strangers?
Yes, they would just be sunning themselves, lying out. They would open their eyes and see a sand shark dangling themselves in front of their nose, and they would scream. And I thought this was the greatest thing. But this relates to why I became a science fiction scholar, because when I was growing up, science fiction was the most outre, out of this world, denigrated subject that you could possibly write about. And I said, well, science fiction, okay, it's like people think it's garbage, but I'm going to make it worse. I am going to write about feminist science fiction, writing about feminist science fiction when I started would be like the President of the United States giving the State of the Union address in a bathing suit, and even Trump did not do that yet. Well, everybody would faint if they saw Trump, but that's another story. So feminist science fiction was the most problematical, screech-evoking field that I could go into. And when I became a feminist science fiction scholar, I was very, very young. I got my PhD at 26, and I spent my 20s running around. And I would run around to academic conferences, and I would write about feminist separatist utopias where the women on the separatist feminist planet, they would kill men who came to their planet. So I would be up there reading about, like, young me, reading about the men coming to the planet, the women coming to the planet and killing the men. And the male science fiction writers would be in the audience, like grabbing their crotches in defense and being hysterical. And I was the first woman science fiction scholar in the profession. I'm the first woman who went through the profession as a science fiction scholar, so that there was young me with all these older men thinking that I was strident and aggressive and beyond the pale of talking about separatist feminist planets where men are killed. And all anybody had to say was how strident and aggressive I was. So I would be standing up at the lectern, giving my talk, driving all the men crazy. And I didn't get married until I was 48 years old, and all I wanted to do was get married. So as I was giving my paper, causing the men to be hysterical about castration, all I wanted to do was find one of them to marry me. So
Well, I suppose we all have our cross to bear, if you forgive the interdenominational reference. But well, what would constitute feminist uh, scholarship then, as opposed to just talking about women writers? What makes it feminist?
If the work talks about the particular role of women under patriarchy. My major book is Feminist Fabulation, Postmodern Fiction, and I said that the definition of feminist fabulation is fiction about patriarchal fiction. In other words, feminist metafiction, because all of the sexist rules about where women should be in society, this is not science. This is just patriarchal fiction. So if you write fiction about the patriarchal fiction and you deconstruct the patriarchal fiction, this is what Ursula Le Guin called a feminist thought experiment, and you can have what Darko Suvin called cognitive estrangement, which is not to see the outlandish as normal. So feminist fabulation gives you cognitive estrangement from patriarchy, so that you could see that that patriarchy is, and fictions about what women should do, that this is not normal. And I've written about this so I could say it. When I was a college student in the 70s, the big news was that women can have orgasms. And all the popular magazines said, how to give your partner 20 orgasms in 20 seconds. And you too could do this. So all the boys were running and saying, oh my God, I have to give women 20 orgasms in 20 seconds. How am I going to do this? Oh my God. And I picked up the magazines and I said, oh, okay. I'm 18 years old and I see now that women can have orgasms. That's very nice. But I got hysterical and I said, what if I was 80 and I thought my whole life that women um couldn't have orgasms and I'm 80 years old. And it's really good that I found this out at 18, because now I could know this for the rest of my life. And I said, well, what is it that I don't know that when I am 80, I'm going to find out and I'm going to regret it? And that's why I was really glad that I was a literary critic, because I knew how to read um, deep structure analysis, so I could find out about all these patriarchal fictions.
Well, and of course I neglected to mention, I mean, this is your second time with us on Semantic Reactions. I should say welcome back.
Thank you
And
for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I was so much looking forward to this.
yeah, me too. And so we did talk about some of this previously about the feminist, science fiction in your work, but maybe to turn to the other side of it, the Jewish science fiction. And is there something that distinguishes Jewish science fiction from non-Jewish science fiction?
Well, I think about Superman, and Superman was 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 created by two Jewish men. Jewish men in the ethnic fiction that is not true were seen as being wimpy.
Hmm.
Like, oh, Trump just called them, he said he likes Jewish accountants and they're short men wearing yarmulkes. Now, this is ridiculous because Bernie Sanders is Jewish and he's a really tall guy. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't make, um, Bernie Sanders is not a short, nebbish wearing a yarmulke. It's ridiculous. So the stereotype of the Jewish man was that they were not American he-men. So I think it is very Jewish that these two Jewish guys invented Superman, and Superman is from Krypton. So Superman is an immigrant because he comes here, and Superman's name on Krypton is Kal-El, and Kal-El, I don't know, it sounds like Temple Emmanuel or something. Yes, El is Jewish, so Kal-El could have been Jewish. So Superman is this Jewish immigrant alien who comes to America, and he's adopted by these Midwestern WASP people, and he has to hide his identity when he's growing up. And Superman is very different from Ma and Pa Kent on their farm.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So,
by the way, El means God.
well, see,
That's
getting
what,
back to what I was saying before
yeah.
with my lack of Jewish education, I do not know that El means God.
Yeah. So any name like any name that ends with L, like Emmanuel, Samuel, and the L stands for God, and the meaning may be something like pray to God or a gift from God or something like that. The Cal, the first, the start of the name Call, and it could either mean voice of God or all that is God, depending on whether you read it as Cal or like Call or Cole. Um, but it could be one of those two, which does correspond to godlike powers in the case of Superman, right?
Yeah, but when I was editing the Jewish Women anthology, it was a little difficult for me because I did not have the background like I would. I just learned 2 seconds ago that El means God. I do not have this education, but I blended my way through, and I'm able, I could edit anything. It doesn't matter about the content. So people knew the content, and if I had to polish up their sentences, I could do it. So I got through it okay.
Well, sure. Well, and so you went about recruiting folks to contribute to this anthology, and you had an idea of who should be covered. Although I noted in the introduction you had, I was actually very impressed because you had a list and a lot of names of women science fiction writers that are not included or not discussed in the anthology. So there are lots of folks in this category.
Yes, there are a lot of Jewish women science fiction writers, and if you have an anthology and you have approximately 10 articles, you can't include everyone. And I just wanted the people who were not in the anthology to be noted, so for further reading, people could find them. And I don't like it when someone um um, I don't like it when someone is erased. And if I wrote something, I would like to see my name in the list. So it would make all the women happy to see their names in the list. And when I've done many academic anthologies, and I like doing it because it's social. It's like come to my party, come to my anthology, and you get to talk to everybody for a year, and you make friends with them. And one of the contributors, Jennifer Kaplan, I had never met her before, and she gave a talk at EVU, YIVO. How do you on 16th Street? How do you pronounce
Yeah, Yivo.
it?
I'm not sure, but
EVO?
yeah,
And I never met her before, so I said, "Oh, I'm going to come meet you." And she gave a talk on Jewish humor, and there was all you could eat Chinese food there, and it was great because all you could eat Chinese food is my favorite thing. So I went and I met Jennifer, and she was great. And you meet friends by doing anthologies. That's why I did all of these anthologies. But anyway, what I wanted to say is that when I do an anthology, I don't say I want this writer covered and this writer covered and this writer covered. What
hmm
I do is I take a person who has who has who's a very good scholar, and I say, go and write what you want. And
oh,
I just make sure that nobody is overlapping.
hmm
Because if someone said write about this, I may not want to write about that. You have to write what you love. And that goes back to being a science fiction scholar, because when I was a young assistant professor, I knew very well that I would have difficulty being a science fiction scholar. But I said, well, what am I going to do? What I'm going to write about John Dryden. I'm not interested in John Dryden. Actually, I had a best friend who was a Dryden scholar, but I got a hold of her, and she became a feminist. And this is an amazing story. She was in my young assistant professor apartment, and I was doing a book on women science fiction writers, and there was a series of science fiction writers, and they had 3 women in one volume because they thought that the women weren't important, where the men got their own volume. But I didn't think anything of this. I was just glad that they would have women. So I think that this could be public knowledge. It's public knowledge that she did this. The scholar's name is Ruth Salvaggio, and she's a best friend of mine, and she's a great feminist scholar. So Ruth comes to my apartment, and I go, and she's a Dryden scholar, and I go, Ruth, you have to help me. I have to write. I need 2 more people in this anthology. You got to write about a woman science fiction writer. She goes, I don't know anything about science fiction. I go, it doesn't matter. You can write anything. She said, all right, Marleen, I'll help you. So I go to my women in science fiction bookshelf. I throw all the books in the air. One landed by my toe, and I picked it up, and I go, Ruth, whoever this is, you're going to write about this woman scholar. So I pick it up, and it is Octavia E. Butler.
Yeah.
Who was unknown then. So I said, and now Octavia Butler is loved. Like if you say Octavia Butler, there's like music that plays in the air because everyone is so enraptured with her. So I said, here, write about Octavia Butler. And we said, okay. So Ruth became the first scholar who ever wrote about Octavia Butler.
Wow.
And she is known to this minute as the first scholar who ever wrote about Octavia Butler, because Marleen threw the books in the air and Octavia Butler landed by my toe. And in the first Black Women in Science Fiction anthology that I did approximately 2000, Octavia Butler was in there. And she said that she didn't want any money for her contribution because she knew that I paid attention to her when she wasn't known. And I said, well, what compensation would you want? And she said, well, just give me a copy of the book and I'll be happy. And she passed away, so I was never able to give her a copy of the book. But Octavia Butler, she was I don't know, I don't have words. She was unbelievable.
Wow. So maybe back to the question though of, is there something that particularly stands out that's common to Jewish science fiction? I mean, you mentioned Superman, but is there, which is the immigrant experience, which is something, again, a common theme for many immigrants, particularly coming from Europe during the early mid 20th century. Is there anything, or I mean, perhaps there isn't. Perhaps it's just a matter of one particular group that is engaged in this genre. But is there something that distinguishes Jewish science fiction from other
well,
I think that
science fiction itself is predominantly Jewish. Like even on Star Trek, William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, they are and were Jewish, and science fiction is basically predominantly American. And the way Jews made Hollywood, I think that Jews also made science fiction. And again, it's the immigrant experience. And in science fiction, you don't have to live by any rules, and you could just make it what you want. And I think that Jews were very creative and were very attracted to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's certainly something that's historically true. And in fact, some years ago, I read a piece that pointed out that Jews are very well represented in the science fiction genre, but are largely absent, or until recently, in the fantasy genre, which is often grouped together, under that heading of science fiction and fantasy, which we often see in bookstores, that there's no equivalent to J.R.R. Tolkien or George R.R. Martin, of the great fantasy writers. There's no, you don't see that a lot much representation among Jewish writers.
There's a Jewish woman fantasy writer who teaches at Queens College named Veronica Shanos.
Hmm.
And she's a wonderful fantasy writer. And there's also a very prolific Jewish woman fantasy writer named Naomi, but her last name is sometimes I block our names. Her last name is escaping me.
Hmm.
And I was thinking that Forest Hills, Queens is a hotbed of science fiction in that Hugo Gernsback, who is a science fiction founder, comes from Forest Hills.
Uh-huh.
Spider-Man, the character, comes from
Right.
Forest Hills because his creator came from Forest Hills. There's a Jewish woman science fiction writer, Susan Schwartz, who lived in Forest Hills, and Donald Wollheim, the founder of Door Books, and his daughter Betsy Wollheim, who took over Door Books after Donald passed away. They're from Forest Hills, and Betsy Wollheim went to Forest Hills High School with me, and except that she was 2 years ahead of me, but I subsequently knew her. And moi is from Forest Hills, so Forest Hills is an absolute hotbed of science fiction. And I put that in the introduction about me and Betsy Wollheim and Susan Schwartz coming from Forest Hills. There was something, well, I guess that there were Jews there, like there were Jews in Israel, there were Jews in Forest Hills. And I guess that, to answer your question, that Jews are attracted to science fiction.
Yeah, and of course, I came from the neighboring neighborhood of Kew Gardens. I don't know of any science fiction folks from from Kew Gardens. We did have Rodney Dangerfield for a while, but I think that's a different genre. Um, but yeah, well, I mean, I think perhaps one explanation is that fantasy, I mean, a lot of the folks dealing with fantasy, that seems to come from a kind of uh, white Anglo-Saxon heritage, and not one where you're constantly, say, running away and moving from one place to another. Um, so it wouldn't figure well with the immigrant experience, for example, for fantasy. But also that it's a view that is pro-science and pro-progress, pro tends to be pro-technology, um, and and pro-education. Uh, so that would fit in.
Yeah.
Um, but maybe to make a finer point on it, then, is there some commonality to Jewish, to science fiction written by Jewish women, then, as getting to the topic of this anthology? Is there some kind of common set of common themes or concerns that come up?
If I think about it, I don't think that there is a subgenre of Jewish science fiction writers that are writing about the same thing. Like
Mhm.
I could say that feminist science fiction is a subgenre, but I don't think that Jewish women writing Jewish women writing science fiction is a subgenre with similar characteristics.
Okay. So then it would be that the anthology is kind of a celebration of a diversity of points of view and themes and topics.
Yeah, like if I look, if I like there's like Judith Merrill would be would is a founding mother of science fiction, and she was Jewish. And there's a writer who's in the Esther Friesner, who's a baby boomer, and she writes hysterically funny science fiction. And Esther Friesner was not written about by science fiction scholars, because not only was she a woman writer, but she was a humor writer. And
Mm-hmm.
humor is also denigrated as a genre. Like humor, funny films don't, there are exceptions, but funny comedy doesn't win Academy Awards. Esther Friesner is hysterical. She wrote stuff like Chicks in Chainmail. The woman is hysterical. Um she just she just she just makes me she just makes me she just makes me she just makes me she makes me crack up. Um and why would scholars not write about Esther Friesner because she writes humor? Why denigrate that? It's hilarious.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we also don't tend to associate humor with science fiction.
Well, I guess that humor is associated with Jews,
That's true. Yeah.
and I guess I would have to call, like, I'm not used to calling myself a fiction writer. I'm seeing myself as a scholar, but I guess I am a fiction. I guess I'm a humorous science fiction writer. And
Mm-hmm.
when something is horrible, I take it and I make it funny, and that is a tenet of New York Jewish humor.
Yeah. You mentioned Judith Merrill. Um, could you tell us, especially for folks who are not familiar with her, a bit about her and what she's written?
Judith Merrill's most famous story is called That Only a Mother, and it's about a mother who has a baby that is deformed because of science, because of an atomic blast. And
Mm-hmm.
the mother does not want to admit that there's something wrong with her baby.
And but you mentioned her as kind of the mother figure for this, and what else has she written?
Well, sometimes sometimes I black I'm blocking out on other works by Judith Merrill, but that's her most that's her most important that's her most important story. And she wrote a memoir called Better to Have Loved,
Mm-hmm.
the life of Judith Merrill. And Judith Merrill, I guess she would be like the age of someone who would have been my mother, like the baby boomer generation. And she, because she's from that time, she was absolutely marginalized. And now there's a new appreciation of Judith Merrill, and she is seen as a founding mother of science fiction. And she was Canadian, and there's a library, I think it's in Toronto, of her papers, and that is a place where science fiction scholars, it's very important to science fiction scholars.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I see in the chapter on her that there's a work called Survival Ship and Other Stories,
Yes,
which is published in Canada,
yes.
and that she had a relationship with Theodore Sturgeon, who was a fairly well-known science fiction writer.
Yes, and I asked Pamela Sargent, who's a science fiction writer. I love Pamela Sargent. I know
Yeah.
her personally, and what can I say? I love Pamela Sargent. I said, write a preface, and maybe I could Pamela Sargent starts her preface. It seems appropriate to introduce Jewish women science fiction writers with an appreciation of Judith Merril, one of the most influential writers and editors who created and developed what we think of as modern science fiction. When I was editing my first anthology, Women of Wonder in the 70s, I was in part inspired by the admirable example of Judith Merril, whose annual year's best anthologies of science fiction sought to enlarge the genre by including stories from science fiction magazines along with fantastic fiction from sources outside the field. If she was demonstrating that science fiction was a diverse genre, not limited to technological speculation and adventures in space, and proving it by collecting stories from both acknowledged masters in the field and writers not usually associated with science fiction, then I was hoping to show that women who had also made notable and often unacknowledgeable contributions to science fiction. So Pamela Sargent is a feminist Jewish science fiction writer, and she said that she was inspired by Judith Merril, and that's why Judith Merril is a mother of science fiction.
Yeah. I like that point. I mean, you mentioned Sargent, and I'm looking at her preface, and the next paragraph um, mentions that John W. Campbell, the famous editor of Astounding magazine, it said that women couldn't write science fiction good enough to be published in his magazine, and that and she Pamela Sargent writes, Campbell lost that bet when he bought That Only a Mother, which came out in Astounding in 1948.
And Campbell saying that women can't write science fiction, well, that is a patriarchal fiction.
It certainly seems that way from this volume that you've
And
published.
and feminist fabulation would say that you would have to write fiction about that patriarchal fiction and have feminist metafiction to say that it's a fiction. And I was able to pick the cover of the book, and it shows like a woman in a skin tight superhero, a very attractive woman in a skin tight superhero costume. And the next anthology that I'm going to do is on um women in fashion.
Oh,
And like if you have a woman in a business suit, that does not make her business like if Marlene Dietrich is wearing a business suit, she does not look she does not look business-like. She looks alluring. So when I had the woman in the skin tight superhero outfit on the cover, um like people said to me, well, isn't that sexist that you have her breasts exaggerated and her body exaggerated? And I said, well, that's what a superhero suit is. You can't have a superhero in a baggy superhero suit. Superheroes wear lycra skin tight suits, and women have breasts. And if you have a woman in a skin tight suit, she's going to have her breasts sticking out, and that's just the way it is. And this is the way that science fiction is depicted and sold. So I may as well have a woman being attractive because that's the way it is. And in the introduction, I talk about Sean Connery winning an acting award, and Mike Myers introduces him, and he discusses a woman. He says to Sean Connery, "Well, you get pussy galore and I forget Pussy Galore and somebody Suzuki and all these sexy people. And who do I get? I get closed leg Finkelstein." And the entire audience laughed, including all the women. So
mhm.
closed leg Finkelstein is a Jewish woman.
Right.
So the joke is that the Jewish woman is hideous looking. And
Mm.
they show a picture of closed-legged Finkelstein juxtaposed with Pussy Galore, and closed-legged Finkelstein. Her hair is a mess. She has giant glasses.
Mm-hmm.
And in Mel Brooks' Spaceballs, the princess is a Jewish princess. She's played by a non-Jewish actress.
Mm-hmm.
And they show a picture of the Jewish princess before she got her nose job. And she looks like closed legs Finkelstein.
Mm.
So there is this, there is this depiction of the Jewish woman as ugly monster. And even in Cabaret, the Jewish woman is portrayed as a large ape.
Mm.
So this is another patriarchal fiction of the hideous looking Jewish woman.
Mm-hmm.
And Mel Brooks did it.
Mm-hmm.
And he should know better. And Mel Brooks divorced his first Jewish wife and married Anne Bancroft. So
Right.
Jewish men are complicit in this denigrating of Jewish women and turning them into monsters. And
Present company excluded, I hope.
yes, or else yes. But if you think about the reality of the Jewish woman, what does the Jewish woman look like? She looks like Gal Gadot,
I was just thinking about Gal Gadot. Yeah.
um, and she looks like Lauren Bacall,
Mm-hmm.
who was friends with my mother because they went to high school together
From the Bronx, I believe.
from Manhattan.
Oh.
They went to Julia Richmond High School. And Lauren Bacall looked like Lauren Bacall, and her father died early in her life, so she used to hang out with my grandfather.
Mm.
Oh, has nothing to do but with women in science fiction, but it's just a fun story. My mother always said that Lauren Bacall was a very big bitch, like
Oh.
as a high school girl would. So I was at an event and Lauren Bacall was there, and um it was like a memorial service for her husband Jason Robarts. And I walked up to her and I said, excuse me, Miss Bacall, but I would like to ask you, do you remember going to high school with my mother, so and so? So Lauren
Mm.
Bacall looks at me and she goes, yes, I remember your mother. But you shouldn't ask me this now. It's totally inappropriate for you to ask me this now. And I put my head down. I said, okay, I'm sorry. And I skulked away. And I said to myself, when the hell am I going to ask Lauren Bacall? It's like I see her every day. So I said, my mother was right. Lauren Bacall was a bitch. But
Ah.
but Jewish women do not look like these monsters like closed-legged Finkelstein and the princess in Spaceballs,
Yeah.
and they got Michelle Pfeiffer to play the person who did the Ponzi scheme guy. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, they got Michelle Pfeiffer in the movie of it to play his wife Ruth.
Mm-hmm.
And Gregory Peck, well, it works with men too because Gregory Peck was in Gentleman's Agreement.
Right. I remember that.
So Jews can't even play themselves in the movies.
Well, there's a lot of controversy about that, whether that is an issue or not. But I wanted to, since you brought up superheroes before, a note that your chapter in this anthology is on the power, on the power, and about a science fiction superhero narrative. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that, about what you wrote.
The Power is by Naomi Alderman, and it's about what happens when women get electrical power in their bodies and they become superheroes because they could just touch someone and kill them.
Hmm.
So it's one of these well, it's a power fantasy about power to put it that way. And in the novel, the the women the women do not make the world better. They become like very they use their power to make the world worse. So it's a dystopia.
And what did you write about then? I mean, because that doesn't sound like a positive
No, it doesn't
view.
sound positive, but in feminist science fiction, there are there are there are there are feminist dystopias because everything everything does not have to come out to be to be positive and and um and 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 good. Women can write dystopias too. And I was just interested in what happens when, like, I like feminist dystopias, and I like to see what happens when 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 women become all powerful, and I like to see what happens when women have to be afraid to walk on a dark street because some powerful man is going to um to rape them and hurt them. So and Naomi Alderman was a disciple of Margaret Atwood in The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, okay.
She knows Margaret Atwood, and she modeled modeled her um modeled her novel on The Handmaid's Tale. And Margaret Atwood has said that nothing in The Handmaid's Tale is made up, that she took everything from history.
Hmm.
And as a feminist science fiction scholar, I don't know what word to use, nauseated that The Handmaid's Tale is becoming reality.
Yeah.
And
By the way, just it was Bernie Madoff. That was the
oh,
name we were trying to think of.
it's an occupational hazard that I sometimes remember, that I sometimes can't remember names. It's a very bad thing to do when you're um um
But the Power was also adapted. I think maybe it was on Amazon Prime.
I
Uh,
don't I didn't see it.
yeah. It also makes me think of there was a film from the 80s called Born in Flames. Uh,
I don't
See
know. I
Borden, which was sort of interesting because it posited a future where America was socialist, but then had it was peace. Yeah, there was a peaceful revolution, but it was a dystopia uh, that where feminists and particularly kind of gay and lesbian feminists um, were kind of fighting against this sort of socialist government because they were not tolerant. And it was something that feminist science fiction film critics, which I know, I mean, you're a literary critic, but they were pointing to back then as an example of how science fiction could be used for kind of making critique, social critique, and commentary,
right,
and from a feminist point of view.
right. And in The Power, it becomes like Nazi Germany, like the all-powerful women treat totally dehumanize the men, and that's not the answer either. But it's his. I cannot believe that all this literature that I studied my whole life with the dehumanization of women is becoming true. And I remember when I was in my 30s, I was teaching at the University of Iowa, and I was teaching The Handmaid's Tale, and I don't know, I guess I'm dramatic when I teach. And I walked in with a red dress, red gloves, and a white hat on my head, looking like a handmaid to teach The Handmaid's Tale. And I thought that this was the greatest thing. So I walk in like this, and the students hated it. And I said, "Why are you so unhappy?" And they go, "Dr. Barr, we respect you. We look up to you, and we don't want to see you looking like a handmaid." So this
Uh,
absolutely did not work. But I never thought I never thought that that I don't even have words. I can't get the words out. I would never think that this is becoming true. Like, I
Yeah,
like to keep my science fiction in the books. I don't want it to be my country.
yeah. Well, but it is the case that a lot of science fiction does serve not so much to be prophetic, because it's always a mistake to read a story that's set in the future and think that it's making a prediction. They're really just describing the present and how things look at, from a kind of distance point of view. But a lot of it does seem to come true in some way or another, at
And
least to get us thinking about where things may be going.
yeah, and I was just thinking that all science fiction is about the present. And the Grandmaster Jim Gunn talked about saving the world through science fiction.
Yeah. Well, I can't help but wonder, because knowing how books are made, that you must have handed in the manuscript for this at least early in 20, well, perhaps a while back. Um, and and I, I would imagine prior to what happened on October 6th, or was it October 7th, I think. I mean, um, I was wondering if there was anything in the book that spoke to that, or that would have been come out differently if, and certainly if what had been written there had been written after that.
I was right. I remember vividly, I was writing the introduction when October 7th happened. And I talked about the abductions, and I put it in the preface. But subsequently, because of all of the politics, and I don't know what word to use, I'll just say all the politics, because of all the politics that was happening, I made the decision not to make this book political and about about the war. I don't want to get into that. And what I did was I took out what I said in the introduction about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Mhm.
And I thought that that was the right decision, because I didn't want the book to be political, because I wanted to talk about Jewish women in science fiction. And I thought that that was the right thing to do. And somebody asked me to be on their podcast, and I said, okay, I'll talk about my new Jewish women in science fiction book. And the person said, well, if I have you on talking about Jewish women in science fiction, then I have to have on a Palestinian scholar talking about Palestinian science fiction, just to have it be balanced. And I said, this is the most ridiculous thing that I have ever heard, and I refuse to be a part of this. And
Ah,
the person was not Jewish, and she couldn't understand what I was saying. She could not
mhm.
understand that I thought it was ridiculous that if I'm talking about an academic subject book and I'm Jewish, you have to have a Palestinian on the podcast with me. I said she couldn't see this. So I just said, this is ridiculous, and let's have a completely different subject.
Ah.
And we had a different subject. But to answer your question, I took out anything about the war, but it was in
Mhm.
there. It was in there in the beginning.
I would say that, and I'll note that you did ask me to contribute a piece to this, and while it was not directly speaking to contemporary politics, because it was an alternate history where, instead of the state of Israel, a Jewish state is founded in Germany after World War II. It's sort of as an alternative to the East German state that was created. Um, that something like that, those political issues do come up in this, again, kind of distanced way.
I was attracted to that novel, and I had three Fulbrights to Germany. and I was a visiting professor in Austria for a year and a half. So I spent like 4 or 5 years of my life living in Germanic countries. And I liked the idea of the alternative state in Germany. And I wanted someone to write about the article. And I asked you, and I'm very happy that you did.
Well, yeah, and I remember that from our previous podcast episode where you talked about that part of your life. And to be honest, I didn't really love that book myself, but
And you
it,
still wrote about it. Thank you, Lance.
well, you asked me to write on that for you, and I do like alternate history. I think that's a very interesting genre. Yes, argument could be made that it actually diverged or split off from science fiction as other genres have, and is no longer science fiction. There's one thing when you have an alternate history that's explained by some kind of event like time travel, causes an alternate timeline. And then that to me is science fiction. But when it's just an alternate history, as if, that's with no explanation of how that came about, I wonder if that even is still science fiction, if it's not some separate kind of genre at that point. Obviously, that there's no right or wrong answer to that,
No.
and from your view, that is science fiction, or you're willing to include that in that category.
Well, alternative history is incorporated within science fiction. So I like alternative history, so I won't argue with that.
Okay. Um, so, I mean, politics does come up. I mean, it might be almost stereotypical to say that a women's perspective or a feminist perspective um, would tend to be more personal. I should say a woman's perspective because feminism is political, but that just a woman's perspective would be more personal oriented, interpersonal, and relational in its focus. And alternate history, of course, is uh, kind of trying to use a narrative form to talk about what might have been in a big picture way, I would think.
Well, I don't think that you can say that women write in this way and men write in this way because the most famous example in the history of science fiction is James Tiptree Jr., who was the pseudonym of Alice Sheldon. There was a famous male science fiction writer who said that the writing before it was known that James Tiptree Jr. was Alice, there was a science fiction writer who wrote, James Tiptree Jr. is ineluctably male. Only a man could write like James Tiptree Jr. And and Alice Sheldon was a government agent. She had like a non-feminine life, and that's why she wrote like that. So
Right,
so the writer who said that that James Tiptree Jr. had to be a male was absolutely wrong.
right. Well, I was just saying as far as, the kind of expectations that there might be, and it is based on gender stereotypes, but you know, we also have come to understand that gender identity is complicated, uh, to say the least.
Yeah.
Well, if you could do a second volume of this, and maybe that's an idea you have, or maybe that's one you would consider, and what would you be interested in seeing, in including it in a volume of that sort?
I am a very honest person, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I would not do a second volume because I did this volume because I thought it would be needed. I thought it was needed, and not because it was my favorite topic. Again, because I don't have a Jewish education.
Hmm.
So I think that that one volume is enough, and I'm much more excited about doing my fashion volume because I'm very, very interested in fashion, but I'm not very, very interested in the topic of Judaism.
Okay. So you would rather have others follow up then?
Yeah, like I laid the initial boundary, I filled in the gap because I'm a very prescient scholar and I see the need for things and I like first I said nobody's writing about women in science fiction. Then nobody's writing about blacks in science fiction, so I'll do that. And okay, nobody's writing about Jewish women in science fiction, so I'll do that. So I filled in the gaps, but I laid the groundwork now for the academic study of Jewish women in science fiction, and now other people have to do it. And again,
Okay.
I just saw it as an obligation and not that I love the topic, but it just made me mad that no one had written about it.
Well, I think it's very understandable, and that many books are written not because the author or editor has a burning desire to do it, but rather feels that it needs to be done and someone has to do it. And so out of a sense of duty, shall we say. So you want to do something on fashion. Can you tell us a little bit about what that would be?
The title of the anthology is Fashioning Future Females, and I want to address the topic about how science fiction deals with clothes,
Ah,
because there is no such thing that a woman could wear that makes her look businesslike and powerful. Because as I was saying about Marlene Dietrich before, anything that a woman puts on makes her look feminine and sexual.
mhm.
And it's like what does the woman candidate for president wear? She has
Right.
nothing to wear. There is no such thing as a power suit for women. And I think that Kamala Harris did the best job dressing as a candidate yet. But she still had to have her pearl earrings and she still had to have her her gold chains. And Hillary's outfits, they were like orange and with all this, they were not streamlined.
Yeah.
So Kamala presented herself in a streamlined way, but she was still wearing heels. And Nancy Pelosi in her 80s fell in Europe on the marble floor and broke her hip. What is an 80-year-old woman doing wearing high heels?
Ah,
She broke her hip on the marble. It's so my fashion and science fiction book um, grapples with the question, what do women wear to be powerful?
wow.
And there's no such thing. And I'm really interested in that.
Now, since I mean, your work is primarily on literature, and while in writing you can describe how people look and their appearance and their clothing, it seems to me that this would kind of push things more into um, other media like film and television. How are you going to approach this?
Well, I think I have a contributor who writes about film. So again, people are free to write about what they want as long as it's science fiction. But I
Mhm.
want to see how people are depicting women in science fiction in terms of what they wear to make them look powerful. Because
Yeah.
like even even in my even in my own life, I remember when I was doing MLA job interviews to get an academic job. I again was with my friend Ruth Salvaggio and another woman, Minrose Gwynn. Um, Minrose is like I don't know. I think she's like Eudora Welty of the 21st century. She's an amazing Southern woman writer. And I was with Ruth and Minrose, and I come out in my MLA job interview suit. And I walk out and I go, well, how does this look? And Ruth goes, the skirt is too long. And I said, okay, so I'm a really good sewer. In college, I had a sewing machine on my desk and I sewed up stuff, like I put the material in the hall of the dorm. I I sewed the clothing together, and I went out on a date with a boy, and I do not remember what I wrote in college or what work I did. I just remember I had my sewing machine. So I go in and I made the skirt shorter. And then Minrose goes, "That's too short." And I said, "I just fixed it." And I started to cry because I couldn't get my skirt suit right. And then I had another friend, Terry, who grew up to be the provost of a SUNY school. And I said she'd be a college president, but she did make it to provost. She was a grad student. She was at MLA. And I had to wear like these heel shoes, and I couldn't walk in the heels. And Terry helped me. And she came with me, and she took like flat shoes, and she was carrying my shoes so I could wear the shoes. Again, I could do the work. I could do the interview. I didn't know what the hell to wear. It was driving me out of my tree.
Well, I will say, as you know, I teach a course on science fiction, film, and TV, and it was in some of the women students' papers that I first saw references to A-line dresses. I'd never heard that phrase before, the A-line, and it was in reference to the uniforms women wore
Flight attendants,
in the
right?
original Star Trek series.
Okay.
Um, but this sounds like a fascinating volume. And are you looking for contributors for that volume?
It's all put together.
It's all ready to go.
No, it's not ready to go.
But
The table of contents is there. I have all the contributors lined up, and the articles are due in the summer.
wonderful. Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, and it has internet. It has someone from Turkey, someone from Austria, someone from Australia. I know like a lot of international, someone from Japan. It's very international, and it has a preface by Donna Haraway, and I think
Oh,
it's the last thing that Donna Haraway is ever going to write, because I think she's 81 and she doesn't want to write anymore. And it has an afterword by Constance Penley, who of course is a film scholar. So Constance Penley can write something about film. And to me, this is the dream team. I cannot imagine having better people than Donna Haraway and Constance Penley. Love them.
that's very impressive. Yeah, I like Penley's did a piece on time travel and the time loop paradox in Terminator and La Jetée, and it was very, really an excellent essay.
So it's, modesty aside, it's going to be, and the contributors are excellent. They're internet. I have someone from South Africa. They're very internationally diverse, and there could be nothing better than Donna Haraway and Constance Penley. Well, I think Donna Haraway is God. I do. Like, I mean, this is, okay. I love funny stories. Um, Donna Haraway was giving a talk at the New School, and I had never seen Donna Haraway before, and I was like so excited. I'm going to go hear Donna Haraway. So I'm in the audience fainting, and I raise my hand and I ask a question, and in front of the whole New School auditorium, Donna Haraway said, "That sounds like a question that Marleen Barr would ask." So in front of the whole auditorium, I go, "There's a very good reason for that. I am Marleen Barr."
You most certainly are.
I are.
You
I
are
love that.
Barr.
I love that story.
It's a great story, and we're really fortunate to have you and to have had the chance to have this conversation and have you on again. I really thank you.
Thank you, Lance. It was a pleasure. And I cannot think of I love spending my Sunday afternoon talking to you. I really, really had a wonderful time. Thank you, Lance.
Well, thank you. And we'll look forward to your new volume coming out.
You've been listening to our March 2025 episode of Semantic Reactions, featuring Marleen Barr. If you like what you've heard, or even if you haven't, please consider becoming a member of the Institute of General Semantics if you're not one already. In addition to supporting our efforts, IGS members receive an annual subscription to our journal, etc., a review of general semantics, access to our online and in-person events, lectures, and seminars, and discounts on the books and audiovisual materials that we sell. Regular membership is only $50 and half off for students. Your membership and any additional donations you care to make will help to support our offerings and activities as we work to bring a measure of sanity to the world. The Institute of General Semantics is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to research and education on a wide range of topics. They include language and symbols, meaning and perception, communication and representation, media and technology, science and epistemology, creativity, and critical thinking. We are dedicated to making the world a better place through practical strategies for improving our semantic environment, individually and collectively. For more information about the Institute and our activities, and to become a member and supporter of our work, please visit our website at generalsemantics.org. That's generalsemantics, one word, .org. And this brings to a close our 31st episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. This is Ben Houck, signing off, saying, we hope you'll join us next time. And until then, just remember this simple fact, that the map is not the territory.